Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a late night Wandering Quill Book Impressions episode here on the channel. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, and today, this evening, we'll be reading a few chapters from a book I just completed not too long ago, Humble Glory by AuthorDodgeMerrin. Now, Humble Glory, in my opinion, epitomizes Roman fantasy. And what I mean by Roman fantasy is stories that are based off of either the Roman Republic or the Roman Empire, but have their own unique spin to it. I love in this story, from what I was told by the author, that it's his kind of story that he wished he had growing up and ones that he wished he had seen. And Humble Glory is really the story of the main character who's part of a brotherhood tasked with protecting the realm, and ultimately he gets hurt very badly. He loses in a fight, but he's saved by these monks of this order who are secluded. They do not trust strangers, and they heal him back to health, all the while trying to figure out what's his angle. Meanwhile, there's another storyline where you have the villain of the story who wants to, in his mind, reshape the Republic and give it back to the people, albeit through very violent means. I don't want to give too much away, but Humble Glory by AuthorDodgeMerrin is a fantastic story. And let's just dive right into the first chapter. Chapter 1, A Man Alone. Darkness shrouded the path through the thick forest, but the dirt path beneath the warrior's sandaled feet was bare and free from any foliage, confirming that his target was nearby. No one else was likely to be coming and going this deep in the great forest. He walked quickly with a short sword in his right hand. All of his senses were turned to the world around him, yet he saw nothing but the shadowy shapes of trees and spiny underbrush. Heard only bird song and small creatures scampering across fallen leaves. And his nostrils detected no more than the smell of damp earth moistened by the morning dew. The stories of attacks upon travelers on the nearby road revealed this to be the latest hunting ground of the bandits plaguing the countryside these past months. The army normally resolved such matters with brutal efficiency, but this group was wily enough to move out of a region before their base camp could be located, then set up another area seemingly chosen at random. Unable to stretch its standing resources to cover its entire territory, especially given the rumors of trouble brewing at the northern and eastern borders, the Senate of the great Naeran Republic had placed a large bounty on the head of the group's leader in hopes his death or capture would scatter the rest. When Raldus Velix, a warrior of Stoneforge, trained from childhood to be among the best fighters in the known lands, heard of this bounty, he knew this was an opportunity which he long sought. For over 2 years now, since completing his training at the age of 18, he wandered the land from the great cities to humble towns looking to make a name for himself. Yet, in all that time, he barely earned enough to pay to stay fed and equipped for battle. Over his beige tunic, he wore a brown leather breastplate and chingulum, which was a belt with leather strips hanging from it to cover his upper legs. Leather bracers covered his forearms, but his shins were bare save for the leather straps of the sandals which wrapped around up to his knees. All of it was old and mismatched, but well oiled and clenched tight. The blade in his right hand matched the length of his arm and shined even in the low light, while his left hand remained empty but was equally ready to strike. His means may be small, but his equipment always came first. He spent the previous night in that armor sitting braced against the opposite side of a tree several paces beside the path he now traveled, sword in hand and no fire to warm him. He sensed his quarry was near, but nothing had awoken him until the birds welcomed the new day with their songs. All he did upon waking was to stand and shake off the chill which had seeped into his bones during the night. When he was sure no enemies were nearby, he propped his sword against a tree long enough to stretch his tight muscles and check the fittings on his armor, then relieved himself before reclaiming the sword and returning to the path. There was no way to know for sure how much time had passed with the sun hidden above the dense canopy, but it felt at least 2 or 3 hours until at last a light appeared ahead, growing in time with his pace to soon reveal a gap in the trees. He slowed long enough to allow his eyes to adjust as he stepped into the clearing, and then continued forward in a slight crouch while turning in a circle as he walked. The grass and flowers rustled as a slight breeze blew from the east, carrying with it the scent of decomposing leaves, but mixed in with the earthy smell was another that did not belong. He breathed deep without disrupting his pace and identified the extra odor of that of human sweat and grime, telling him someone was hiding among the trees. Another small gust revealed that the smell was far stronger than it should be at the distance, which could only mean that there was more than one potential enemy waiting to ambush him. Such information would cause a lesser man to turn back, but he kept going, his lips pulled back in a tight smile. This might actually prove to be a challenge for once. He had crossed almost halfway when a stout from the tree line drew his gaze, and he froze as several armed men broke out and ran towards him. Slight save from the sound of their rapid footsteps. Each one was dressed differently, from wearing nothing but a half tunic to covering their genitals, to sets of armor even more mismatched than his own, and certainly less maintained. The weapons were equally disparate, with a variety of swords, clubs, and axes, but a few of them even had shields, from smallish round ones favored by the tribes in borderlands to the large rectangular styles used by the Naeran army. The warrior resumed his slow turn, as over a dozen of them came from all sides and surrounded him, but he made no move to attack or flee. "What's this? A lost pup wandering the woods?" a harsh voice accused. A large man with brown hair hanging over his ears and a scraggly beard covering his face stepped out from the others as they all chuckled at his little joke. The warrior stood to his own imposing yet somewhat shorter height to deliver his answer. "My name is Raldus Velix, and you, Talio Atroni, are coming with me." This time the laugh was much louder, and the leader joined in as the loudest amongst his crew. "I don't go anywhere I don't want, boy. I didn't ask if it was what you wanted. Do you wish to die, wretch?" the bandit threatened, but all Raldus did was smile wide. "Let me at him, boss." A particularly ugly man, his shaggy chest and gut darkened with grime on full display, requested. "He's all yours." The man roared and challenged, banged his axe on his shield twice, then charged at his target while shouting as loud as possible. Raldus calmly waited for him to close the distance before darting to his right and sticking out his foot to trip his attacker. As the man fell, he grabbed his shield to hold him up long enough to stab him through the heart from the back, then swiftly pulled off the shield and slid his own arm through the straps. Most of the man's companions stared at the scene in shock, but their leader's reaction was one of raucous laughter. "Looks like you're not dumb," he remarked, which he followed up with an irritated look at his men, asking, "What are you waiting for? Kill him." There was a brief hesitation, but then two men ran in screaming, only to end up joining their comrade on the ground within seconds. "Are you just going to keep lining them up? Are all of you too dull to take out one fool?" This time one ran up behind Raldus, but he still heard the man coming and spun around while crouching to slash him across both legs. Two more ran in, forcing him to block one with his shield while dodging the other. Before he could counter, three more entered the fray, and his world dissolved into dodging and blocking attacks, with counter-strikes few and far between. Then a hammer smashed into his shield, and he cried out in pain as it shattered, and he stumbled back while his left arm hugging his chest. About time now ended. A younger bandit, emboldened by the warrior's injury, leapt towards him holding a mace in both hands and raised for an overhead strike. But Raldus' sword slashed across his throat while still in the air, and he crumpled to the ground, gasping for air with blood streaming through his desperately clutching fingers. A strike from above drove Raldus to the ground, after which a foot stomped his right wrist and his sword wrested from his grip. He tried to stand up and shoulder the bandit off him, but the ambition was ended with a swift kick to his side. More kicks than could be counted rained down upon him, leaving him no room to fight, and his world gradually turned dark. The bandit leader chuckled as he strolled past his men, who were bent over, gasping for air. He did over the interloper's body, smiling as he was savored this moment. He then leaned down and picked up the warrior's sword, which still lay in the short brown grass nearby. Nice sword. Wonder he killed it for, eh? Who cares? It's mine now. He marked after tearing off the tunic sleeve of the nearest man to wipe off the dirt and blood. He walked past the group while holding up the sword to admire it in the light and finally told them to help themselves to the rest. The others set to work on the body, their earlier fatigue forgotten as they stripped off the armor and searched for any gear that might be of use and one he was carrying. Those who couldn't get to that corpse set to work on their fallen comrades to pilfer their gear without hesitation or remorse. Boss! Someone suddenly called out, and Talio turned back to see those around the young fool standing back in shock. Curious, he lowered the sword to his side and sauntered over to see them. Staring at a tattoo on the youth's outer right forearm just above his bracer. The black ink was marked by streaks of blood, but the symbol of a round shield between two cliffs was recognizable. Stone Fort, someone gasped. Not even one of the best fighters in the world could beat us, Talio declared as he raised his arms high, causing the nearest man to lean back, avoiding losing an eye. He expected cheers, but got whispers instead, so he dropped his arms and glared at his men with disgust. What's the matter with you? He's dead. We're alive. Now everyone will fear us, but he's right. We killed him. No one can stop us. Now most of them had the heart to cheer as pride swelled in Talio's chest, lifting his chin as he grinned at his men. That's better. Now finish up. We have work to do, he commanded. Then started walking away. Should we cut it off as proof? No, nobody would be fool enough to not give us what we want if we show them that. No, leave it. Our story will be good enough, and anybody who sees the body will be also tell a tale. Now move it. Pain racked Raldus' body with every movement as he labored to breathe as he pulled himself forward by his right arm, while his left arm dragged at his side. The taste of metal filled his mouth, and spitting out the blood every few seconds did little to lessen it. He did not stop. Rocks, sticks, and other debris scratched and cut his exposed skin as his tunic hung off him in shreds. He struggled to raise his head to look for obstacles, and bugs crawled across him, scenting an easy meal. None of this deterred him. He refused to die this way. His end would not come at the hands of a bunch of thugs. His fortress would not be his final resting place, lost and forgotten for all time. Nothing but a nameless skeleton picked over by a scavenging beast. Not this way. He groaned as he dug his fingers into the soft dirt and pulled. His vision blurred and darkened, and his face fell to the ground. It was soft and called him to rest, only for a little while, if possible. No. His voice was scarcely a whisper. He tried to reach out again, but his arm would not move. Everything was growing numb, and even the pain was fading away. I never fail. Never. Do what you can for him, Abadrol directed after the teenage girl had finished examining the many wounds of the young man a hunter had found in nearby walls. I will tend to his needs for as long as he has them, Ariel promised as she dipped a cloth in the bucket of water beside her and began wiping off the dirt and dry blood. We would care for him ourselves, but you have more experience in such matters for helping when a farmer is injured, Gerald offered, and her response was a simple nod. It was difficult to believe the young man was still alive in this condition, and impossible to hope he would recover. Everyone could see the cuts and bruises covering his naked body as he lay on the bed, but the girl had also reported finding 3 broken ribs, a shattered right wrist, and a broken left arm. After helping carry the man to the monastery for treatment, the hunter had returned to where he found the lad and followed the trail of blood and disturbed ground to discover he had crawled for over a mile after fighting multiple attackers. The little bodies of those he killed still lying in the clearing where it happened. The force of will in this man, barely out of his teen years, must be incredible. What is this? Ariel questioned as she held up the man's right arm. On his forearm, amidst the scratches and bruises, was a black ink tattoo of a circle between 2 slanted, jagged lines, the mark of his creed. He had heard of this symbol before and the people who wore it, but did not know much of them other than their way was one of violence. There were other duties for him to attend, so he turned to leave, but stopped to address the young man in the gray robe standing beside the door. He is to be watched at all times. Do not leave her alone with him. The man screamed again as Ariel pressed a cool, damp cloth to his forehead and whispered to him, her soothing tone of greater importance than any word. It seemed to do little good as he continued to strain against the ropes holding him to the bed while railing against unseen terrors. This was the second night under his care, and the fever which had taken hold on the first showed no signs of letting up. She hadn't wanted to restrain him in fear of causing more pain, especially given his broken wrist and arm, but the monks insisted out of concern for her safety. You can't defeat me. Nobody can defeat me, he shouted at the ceiling, his eyes wide but unseeing. Shh, you're safe. No one's trying to hurt you. That means nothing. Nothing. "But still, you must calm yourself," she insisted. But he only screamed and threw himself backward into the bed. After her mother's death, when she was but a young girl, she had assumed the responsibility of looking after her household while the men worked the fields. The other women of the community helped as needed and taught her many things, and experience taught her the rest. In her 18 years of life, she had provided care for the sick and injured many times, including one man trampled by a horse who had inevitably succumbed to his injuries. It was not easy to be near someone when they were suffering, especially when they seemed sure to die, but she never lost the will to do everything in her power to cure them and comfort them. She began softly singing a hymn as she refreshed the cloth in the bucket of water on the floor to her right, then used it to wipe the sweat from his face. Even if he couldn't understand her words, she hoped that the sound of her voice would at least bring him a measure of peace. It was all she could do. Chapter 2. When a Man Falls. Waking felt like climbing out of a deep, dark well with a boulder strapped to his back, but Raldus forced his eyes open to the sight of candlelit dancing on a wooden ceiling. He slowly turned his head, wincing in pain as it shot through the numbness weighing down upon him, and so discovered a young woman standing over him, wringing out a cloth. "Who?" he managed to croak before his voice gave out. "Do not fear," she reassured him as she placed a cool cloth on his forehead. "Where? Safe." "What? You are hurt, and you have been delirious with fever for 3 days. Rest easy." Sleep began to take hold of him once more, but he tensed his jaw to fight it off, as he needed to know more. Before he could speak, a middle-aged, balding man in grey robes entered and told the girl to leave. She obeyed without question, so Raldus attempted to question the newcomer. "Your questions can wait. Go back to sleep," the man ordered, then left without awaiting a response. The warrior attempted to get up, but his stiff muscles resisted, and he soon found himself drifting off into sleep. A single candle and the coals of the earth were all that lit the modest kitchen in Ariel's humble home, with nothing but darkness to be seen through the small gaps between shutter flaps blocking the window. She had already placed the bread and cheese on the table, while a ceramic pot full of beans still hung on a hook over the hearth, the lid of which she now removed so you can stir them and ensure they were ready for when her father Imri and brother Tobias woke before too long. She would complete her chores, no matter how tired she was, or maybe from any amount of other work that came by her way. The others got up right before dawn, and the two of them rinsed their hands and faces using a bucket of water in the corner, drawn from the town well before dusk the previous evening. Imri went first, and Tobias followed to splash away the last vestiges of sleep, while their father took the linen towel from a nearby wall hook to dry himself, after which the teenage boy used the same towel before leaving it on the counter. When that was done, they all took their breakfast at the wood table of 4 wide boards and rectangular legs in the kitchen, saying very little as there was nothing to be said. A day of labor awaited them all, and each knew what they had to do. Her father and younger brother finished eating and headed to work when the sky was starting to lighten, leaving her to clean up, which she did after opening the shutters without complaint. By the time all was in order and she left the house to tend her duties in the monastery, the sky was lit bright blue by the sun now over the horizon, and the cows were lowing in the fields while birds sang their dawn greetings. She breathed deep of the early spring air, feeling quite warm in her beige linen dress and red woolen shawl, refreshing herself in the new day as she walked the stone path from the houses to the monastery complex on the hill overlooking the town. Morning light streaming through the slats of a shuttered window woke Raldus, and after allowing himself a quiet groan of discomfort, he slowly sat up in the bed, using only his right forearm to prop himself up, since the left one was bandaged across his chest. A man dressed similar to the one from the previous night, but younger, and with a full head of short black hair, entered and attempted to gently push him back down, while insisting he still need to rest. "Get away from me," the warrior growled as he shrugged the hands away from his shoulders. "You are not yet healed," the man stammered as he stood there wide-eyed. "I know what I'm doing," Raldus responded, his voice rising. The flustered man, who couldn't be more than a few years older than his charge, attempted to say something else, but his mouth just kept opening and closing without sound until he finally fled the room, red-faced. It took a bit of time, but he managed to sit up in the bed, to swing his legs around and stand up, all while clenching his jaw against the pain his body racked all over. Bandages wrapped his entire torso in addition to the ones holding his left arm to his chest, and even more were wrapped so tightly around his right forearm and hand that he couldn't even move it at the wrist or flex his fingers. Scab cuts and purplish bruises covered his bare legs and could only guess the state of his face. He spotted a fresh loincloth and tunic hanging on the back of a solitary chair, so he donned both as quickly as he could. When he looked down at the beige tunic, he noticed at least 3 places where someone had so expertly sewn the tears that the stitches were almost invisible. Why would anyone go through the trouble of not only tending his wounds, but also fixing his clothing was beyond his reasoning, but he put the confusion out of his mind and began searching for his equipment. When he couldn't find either his armor or his swords in the small room, his suspicions increased and grew warm from the anger manifesting to match it. Raised voices greeted Ariel as she approached the stranger's room, and she quickened her pace in concern. After turning the corner into the hall, she spotted Brother Melkor standing in the doorway to block the guests from exiting the room. "I will not be held captive," the stranger shouted. He appeared ready to strike the exasperated monk despite needing to prop himself up on a chair to keep standing and having only limited use of one arm. But he calmed down when he saw her coming. "I need to check your bandages," she addressed calmly, without commenting on the argument. Melkor looked unsure for a moment, but then the stranger nodded his consent and sat down on the edge of the bed. "So the monk let her in. You were here last night," the outsider commented after she removed his tunic and began working on the bandages covering his torso. Her only reply was a brief nod, and he didn't say anything else. He watched her, the green eyes focused on her face as she tended his wounds. This made her a bit uncomfortable, but there was no hostility, so she just ignored him and kept attending on what she needed to do. Then his gaze darted to the door, and a moment later she heard a deep voice telling Melkor to wait outside. She recognized the voice as belonging to Gerald, the head of the monastery, and continued working. "What is your name?" Gerald demanded to the stranger. "Raldus Velix. Do you know where you are? Who we are?" The answer was a shake of his head to say no. "What business does Stoneforge have in this area?" "Do you always question guests in this matter?" "We don't have many guests here. We prefer to keep to ourselves. What is your business here?" "You know what I do," Raldus remarked as he held up and presented his right forearm to the abbot. A bandage currently covered it because of the broken wrists and cuts, but Ariel had seen the tattoo during his initial care and pointed to the monk. She didn't know what it meant, but evidently, Gerald did. "Why are you here?" "I might be able to answer if you told me who you are and what this place is," Raldus shot back. Both were silent for a time, and although she did not look up at them, Ariel easily imagined they were both staring each other down. Gerald was accustomed of being obeyed, but this man did not fear or respect him. "Please lie down," Ariel spoke up. His first response was to stare at her as if he had forgotten she was even there. "No," he said in a moment. "I need to clean the wounds on your legs," she insisted, but he did nothing. "She is the only reason you are alive. For 3 days she cared for you while you thrashed and screamed at nothing," Gerald revealed, his tone stern. The man's features softened as he looked into her eyes, and he finally laid down and allowed her to continue. "We are an order of monks. This is our monastery," Gerald explained, ending his stand-off. "You don't look like the priests I've seen. We keep to ourselves." "This is in the great forest?" She didn't even see Jared nod, but saw in Ralph's expression that he had answered thusly. "I was hunting a bandit who has been hiding nearby. I didn't even know you were here and don't care now that I do. All I want is to get out of here. We don't like having outsiders here, but we won't deny someone in need. You can stay until you're healed, but you will be watched at all times," Gerald decreed, and then left without saying another word. And with that, viewers and listeners, we will stop here. Now, Humble Glory is an amazing series. It's the beginning of a trilogy, it's a great story, and it definitely opens the world to a new kind of storytelling. It's reminiscent of like fantasy stories. Well, I shouldn't say fantasy. Well, there is fantasy elements in Humble Glory. But what I really do appreciate about it is that it is a story of a hero's quest. Truly, this man, who we just know is from this order, we're not giving too much information in the beginning, but he goes through trials. And actually, for the whole rest of the book, we learn Talio's side, which I do appreciate the author doing, giving us 2 different perspectives, the heroes and the villains, and how they grow from this experience. Obviously, of course, Raldus is the hero, and he will win, of course. but Talio also believes what he is doing is right in some manner of speaking. And what I also enjoy is the depiction of the fights. I love the characters. They feel very organic. And it's sort of like a blend of medieval with antiquities, which is very nice. I do appreciate that. And Dodge really nails it in on when we get later in the book of the Naeran Republic, how it's very much modeled after the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. And all the characters play great roles. Gerald, we are to believe, is like an antagonist, but I wouldn't say he is an antagonist, so to speak, but he is a character who's very complex. So I will definitely say Humble Glory is an easy 5 out of 5 for me. And I know a lot of my fellow readers of history, fantasy, and historical fiction will definitely enjoy Humble Glory. And I will link it all down below in the description of this video. And make sure to check out Dodge's interview right here. Well, thank you everyone for joining me for another Wandering Quill Book Impressions episode here on the channel. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful evening.